How long would we work out our own self-governance institutions? How would we figure out how to resolve disputes among ourselves? Is the gentleman who's going to Harvard here? We might appoint the gentleman who's going to, there he is. We might appoint him as the chief dispute resolver. But, it might actually take a little while for us to figure out who's going to resolve the disputes, what's going to happen. These are poor rural people who figured all this out themselves. And more than 50 groups have done this. It's like this wonderful little example of local democracy. It's Tocquevillian, right? It's this beautiful example of giving people a little scope for freedom, and what do they do with it? They do really interesting things. Here's how their economic benefits have changed over time. So from having no income from this activity in 1994, because it wasn't permissible, again, this is older data, 2007. In 2007, Namibians were making just under 40 million Namibian dollars a year. Yes, which I can translate.
I was thinking, if you want to finish up, I had a question on the whole kind of project over here with CNM, CPI, and RM.
Why don't we wait until the end?
Okay,
if you want to just make a note so you don't forget, that way, that would be great. So 40 million Namibian dollars doesn't work out to be a lot in U.S. dollars. It comes out to about 5 million U.S. dollars spread across the conservancies over time. But again, I want you to remember that these were people who were subsistence farmers or herders in 1997, and now are increasingly finding ways to inject cash into their local economies. Let me show you a little bit about what they're doing. How are they earning their income? Most of it's through that kind of joint venture tourism that you saw in the Teufelsfontein example. So they build lodges, they invite tourists to come in, tourists pay to come visit their conservancy land. Some conservancies also engage in trophy hunting, which means that you go into a conservancy with a professional hunter. It could be a conservancy member, or it could be someone who's hired by the conservancy or given a concession by the conservancy, and you go shoot an elephant, or you shoot a kudu, or you shoot something else that you want. And these animals have different prices. Elephants might cost $20,000 to shoot. A kudu might cost $2,000 to shoot. Trophy hunting isn't allowed on all conservancies, but it is allowed on some, and you can see it's the second largest source of revenue for these conservancies. So do conservancies that allow trophy hunting have incentives to allow the professional hunter to kill all the elephants on their land? No, they don't. I mean, the incentives work in a way that you want to protect the potential income stream over time, so they pretty carefully monitor what's taken in terms of trophy hunting. And then some other ways in which the conservancies make money. They have enough animals now on conservancy land that they sell them to other places. Countries that are experiencing large amounts of poaching, like Kenya. Kenya has a completely different system for dealing with wildlife. It's like it's the extreme opposite of Namibia. Countries where there's a lot of poaching and wildlife numbers are plummeting, the Namibians are now selling animals to those countries and making money from that. So they're making money in different ways, but at the same time, the environment has kind of rebounded. It's a pretty dramatic story, actually, and these are just figures from one area of Namibia, the northeast corner of Namibia called the Caprivi region. What's happened to wildlife numbers in those areas since the legislative change, since devolving the property rights to the local people, which again, remember, provides incentives for local people to protect the animals rather than poach them. Well, you can see in all cases, pretty much, numbers of wildlife have increased pretty dramatically. In some cases, maybe too much success. Huge numbers of increases in terms of buffalo, not so much in terms of giraffe. I don't know what the story is with the giraffe. But elephant numbers in Namibia have more than doubled on conservancy land. In a country like Kenya, elephants are continuing to face significant threats from poachers. Elephant numbers have plummeted dramatically in Kenya. They're rising dramatically in Namibia and other countries that have community conservation. Warthogs, they probably migrated someplace. Warthogs, I have to tell you, might be the single cutest animal to see in person. They're just really adorable. Zebra numbers, I mean, you can see the numbers for wildlife are pretty dramatic, indicating that local people are doing what we would expect them to do. Now, so let me say this about the two policy entrepreneurship cases. In the case of Rwanda, here's a curious thing, and in the case of Namibia both. Why did you get policy entrepreneurship? How did the policy entrepreneurs do what they did? It's kind of surprising to see a government bureaucracy give up power Why did the Ministry of Environment give up the power to the local people to manage the wildlife? In Rwanda, why did the government break up the monopoly control of the coffee sector? There were vested interests in both countries that might have stopped those legislative and regulatory changes. In both cases, I think the answer is, at least in part, that there was a window of political opportunity. In Rwanda, there was a political breakdown. And so the old vested interests who had controlled the coffee sector in the past had all been Hutus. They were gone. They weren't there anymore. There was an opportunity to do something different in that sector. In Namibia, it was the white South Africans who controlled the wildlife in the past. When the country gained its independence in 1990, there was a window of opportunity for policy entrepreneurs to step in and say, let's not just focus economic benefits on white people. Let's expand opportunity and try to benefit all Namibians, black rural Namibians as well. So in the case of Rwanda and in the case of Namibia, these liberalizations have really helped people at the bottom of the economic pyramid the most. And that's why I think they've been so successful over the course of several years. Can you get those kinds of policy entrepreneurs operating effectively when you don't have windows of opportunity, when you don't have a crisis, when you don't maybe have your back up against a wall economically? We're not seeing a lot of it, actually, in other parts of Africa. I mean, it's kind of a sad thing to say, but policy entrepreneurship seems almost to take a crisis or a dramatic change of political power in order to accomplish the reforms that are needed. Maybe I'll talk in a few minutes about how else you can get that. Very quickly about traditional entrepreneurs in Africa. I don't know the extent to which this is evident, but Africa is filled with entrepreneurs. They do all sorts of interesting stuff. They're increasingly doing work in a globalized sense. They're increasingly trading not only across their borders. Actually, Africans trade very little across their own borders, very little intra-regional trade, which is one reason why it's still poor. They're doing much more trading to Europe or the U.S., thanks to two pieces of legislation, the AGOA legislation in the United States, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and then everything but arms in Europe that basically says, okay, Africans, if you produce stuff, we'll accept it duty-free in our borders as long as it's not arms. So that's been that's been a good legislative help to promote more traditional entrepreneurship in Africa. Somehow I always have to press that. Maybe because we're running short on time, I'm actually not going to talk about this so much. I just wanted to point out that there are, although most entrepreneurship in Africa is small scale, there is some large scale multinational kind of business that exists across the continent. It tends to be associated with extractive industries. Ilovo Sugar is just one nice example of a large private sector company that's trying to work with smallholder farmers in order to get a reliable constant source of sugarcane, and that's been a pretty successful project. I'll talk a moment more about M-Pesa, because M-Pesa is just a great story. This is a story of a private sector business started by the cell phone companies Safaricom and Vodafone in 2006. And what M-Pesa does is it allows you to avoid banks. So most Africans are unbanked. They don't use commercial banks. They don't make, they're kind of, if you ask them, they may be kind of put off by commercial banking, but they need to transfer money. This has been a drag on economic growth, not being able to access credit, not being able to transfer money easily and effectively. The M-Pesa project is a mobile money service. You use your cell phone and you transfer credits to vendors, or you transfer credits to people to whom you owe money, again, using cell phone technology. It's a business that didn't exist in 2006. Today, there are over 12 million people using this service, mostly in Kenya, but in some other East African countries. And it's created a lot of jobs, not high-paying jobs, but jobs at places like this where people buy these little cards that you scratch off and you add value onto your cell phone so that you can then transfer it to people you want to pay. And that's how the money transfer thing operates. This is a huge development in Africa, funded by cell phone technology. Cell phone technology has been transformative in sub-Saharan Africa, not only allowing people to be in communication with friends and families, but allowing people like farmers easy access to information about where the best market price for their goods are, and then allowing things like this. It's kind of leapfrogging around problems related to commercial banking in sub-Saharan Africa. So very cool private sector effort to deal with the problem of poverty. Social entrepreneurs do this other sort of interesting stuff. A lot of social entrepreneurs are doing things like running small private schools. This is a private school in Kibera, which is one of the larger slums within Nairobi. So when I walked in, these kids were their kids are always happy to see visitors. This is a small private school in a slum. So the parents are paying for these. The parents are living in the slum, paying for these kids to go to school. Why is that? Because the public sector can't educate the kids. Because if they were to go to the nearest public school, they would have 60 kids in their class. This class looks crowded to you, and it has about 35 kids. There would be twice as many kids in the public school. And the teacher probably wouldn't show up, to be honest with you. Not every day, anyway. And they probably wouldn't have the books that they have here. So an interesting thing, when you look across sub-Saharan Africa, are increasingly these social enterprises, business-oriented individuals, providing services that people need, mostly for a profit. And they do it, and people are willing to pay for it, which is kind of cool. Here's another Kenyan example, and then I'm almost done. Every time I give a talk like this, I'll go home and my son, who's 13 and a half, will say to me, please tell me you didn't tell the toilet story. And I have to tell him, I did tell the toilet story, because it's such a great story. This is an eco-toilet. A private sector entrepreneur got sick and tired of the fact that his mother and his sisters had to use the bathroom outside in Kenya, which is not only really unsanitary, but for women, potentially very dangerous, especially in the evenings if you have to go outside to use the bathroom. You're subject to all sorts of predations. He said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we started a service where people could go to a safe toilet, get clean water, and maybe do things like buy convenience store things here, or maybe get their shoes repaired over there, or maybe have a little ATM over here. So he's come up with this business design, which is create a nice looking facility where people can use the bathroom, take a shower, get clean water, do a couple of other things, and he provides a solution to the problem of sanitation, insufficient sanitation capacity, insufficient sanitation infrastructure in his country. In the Mathare slums where he comes from in Nairobi, there were 2 toilets for 60,000 people, 2 functioning, which so you can just imagine. I don't probably need to say anything else. So he's now been building these sort of kiosk things around Kenya. There are over 400 of them now. He won a Clinton Global Initiative Prize 2 years ago for being the leading social entrepreneur in Africa. The Acumen Fund has funded him, so he's been getting some funding from the philanthropic world. But look what he's doing. He's providing clean water and good sanitation services to his countrymen. He's also providing jobs at the same time. So a very interesting approach, social entrepreneurship approach, really, to dealing with problems of poverty. Well, I had mentioned in the class that actually some of the concerns that you might have about Africa are diminishing slowly. There is a lot of good news that's coming out of Africa now. It's been coming out for the last several years. More and more people are talking about it. I love talking about it. The good news is that things are getting better in Africa. Not everywhere, not in every country. There are still places that are really troubled. But in general, across the region, there's less conflict than there was 10 years ago. It is less costly to do business. There's less inflation than there used to be. There are smaller public debts than there used to be, smaller public deficits. There's an improving climate for doing business. But there are still challenges, and this is why there needs to be a continued focus on supporting the kinds of entrepreneurs I was talking about. What are the real challenges? Well, it's still the case that there's a lot of problems with governance. You know, there's President Gbagbo in Ivory Coast who doesn't want to go away, and I didn't look at the news today, so I don't know if the French actually got him out or not, but he lost the election, he doesn't want to go. Things like that happen too often still. There is still a really strong need to improve property rights on the ground. This is a very big problem in Africa. There's a strong need to improve the legal system so that people can enter into contracts and have those contracts enforced. There's a strong need to improve trade within Africa. Africa has the highest level of tariffs of any other part of the world, regionally, African tariffs. So it's very expensive to trade from, let's say, Malawi up to Nigeria. That's a very costly proposition. Those tariff rates are coming down, but coming down slowly. And creating safe space for entrepreneurs. This is the way that countries grow. This is what's going to help Africa transition from a place that